So good morning on this Christmas day of 2021. I wish you all a very happy Christmas, a prosperous new year, a wonderful festive season, celebrating the incarnation of Christ. The subject of today's talk is a little different. It's the universality of Christmas. Naturally, Christmas or Christ's Mass is essentially a Christian festival, and yet throughout the world, everybody from shopping malls to countries which have not much Christian tradition celebrate this wonderful festival. Wonderful festival because it seems that there's a spirit of joy permeating society, a spirit of goodwill. Maybe there are ceasefires such as happened in the World War I, where two antagonistic opposing sides decided that they would put all their antagonism and hostility and brutalism aside. And instead of shooting each other and bombing each other and throwing hand grenades, they'll join together in a spirit of joy and peace and love. Wouldn't it be wonderful if this was universally accepted on every day of the year? It is only because we see people as different and separate on the one side and have some sense of egoism on the other that says we are possibly different and better than others. Sometimes I call this, with a little sense of humor, nosism. That is, my nose is better than yours, on the grounds that it is mine. The actual Christian religious festival of Christmas and Christmastide, of course, is twofold. There are still those Christian churches who hold on to the Julian calendar, the Julian dates, and there is a great dispute about or there was in the early Christian church, about the actual date of Christ's birth. In fact, we don't really know. And because we don't know, we have taken maybe a suggestion from the early church fathers that says that December 25th in the Roman world was celebrated as the winter solstice. And it was in fact at the spring solstice, which is March 25th, that actually it might have taken place. But to reconcile Roman festivals, they brought it in. And so this was called Sol Invictus, the celebration of the sun. We have to understand, of course, that Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, was probably a follower of Sol Invictus, as well as a follower of Christianity. And this was entirely political and practical, although, of course, we can't question his motives. The symbolism of the nativity, of course, is very profound, and I mentioned this last night as well at our Christmas Eve celebration. And it gives us also a clue to the universal nature. Why should we have so much feeling at this time, whether we are religious or not, whether we follow Christianity or not? We see lights everywhere. We see Christmas carols being sung, but not only Christmas carols, but we also find secular songs that gives us a sense of sentimentality, a little bit of nostalgia. Certainly in my own childhood, we would have waited with great anticipation when St. Nicholas comes. Santa Claus is popularly known as, now very much modeled on the certain soft drink, American soft drink. But certainly it was great excitement that we would receive some gift. I often say to people, you tell your child up to the age of 9 that there's such a thing as Santa Claus. He comes down, miraculously down a chimney, and supplies you with presents. This is one of the traditions, universally anyway. And so by the age of 9, no child believes it anymore. But what will you say? Will you say that you have lied to the child? No. You will tell the child, actually, Christmas and Father Christmas and Santa Claus, or Santi as we call it in Ireland, is not a person. It's a spirit of generosity and giving. And so once they understand that, you now have a model of transforming childhood stories, myths with great depth of meaning into something much more meaningful, something that is deeper, something that is more mature. And so there's a great deal of profundity in the simple crib scene that you see behind me. It is not necessarily a literal thing, but we can take the more profound meaning, which makes it more universal. The universality or the clues are found in the Christian text of St. Luke's Gospel, where Jesus is born in something like an animal shed or a cattle shed. He's laid in a manger where all babes are nurtured, put in something like a cot in this day and age. And he writes this, that there was no room in the inn. And of course, this might seem just a factual statement of that time, but I think we can look at it deeply. Because to understand why it's symbolic and why it's universal, the nativity episode can have a relationship between what is the Old Testament of the Jewish people and the New Testament of the Christians. We can see that the condition that we find in a stable is equivalent to roomlessness or homelessness. Pin this here. And so we can see it represents the embryonic condition of humankind, perhaps. And we find homelessness is there, godlessness is there as a result, and these are equivalent. And then there's no room in the inn, so the aspect of the human condition also has been intuited in a variety of ways by thinkers across the centuries. Man is born free, essentially, in the Vedanta philosophy. The Vedanta philosophy is no different from any other fundamental philosophy of any other religion. It is the substratum of all beliefs and religions. So that we can see that many thinkers across the centuries will acknowledge man's inherent freedom. Rousseau has written about this, but everywhere he says, despite our inherent freedom, we feel that we are all in chains. We go to the great bard Shakespeare's Macbeth feels cabined, cribbed, confined. Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov and Tolstoy's Nekhlyodov, they share the same predicaments. Victor Hugo's Jean Valjean finds the world like an extended prison. And they and a host of other characters are just emblems of the roomlessness, the strange arena that we find ourselves. And this marks our human existence. We are far from home, or we seem far from home. So in a sense, we are also roomlessness. We have no place in the inn. And that distance is the source of all our human suffering. There's no room for being fully and freely human in our confinement of what we call the familiar world. Except maybe perhaps for some of the privileged few in a material sense. Freedom of thought and expression, a right to equal opportunities, these are great high values. These are high values for growth and development in every sense, social, physical, educational. But really, they're all romantic ideals. We are far from them. When you look at the condition of the world today, you'll see slavery is more than ever. We'll see violence highlighted as conflicts throughout the whole world. Despite this message of peace that this particular period of time brings to all people. So the roomlessness that we see as what Jesus encountered at this birth becomes a central concern in his life and teachings. Addressing this universal reality, Jesus said, "Abide in me and I in you." What a beautiful statement. Abide in me and I in you. This is pure Vedanta. God is the home of the homeless. We can consider it that way. And that's the tiding of great gladness to the whole of humanity, not just for Christians. And so that's what we get, this sense of wholeness at Christmas time, an intangible kind of feeling of bonhomie, without really relating it in any way to a divine incarnation or to its religious roots. Love your neighbor like yourself. This is a very key value for all religions. And yet we find religions themselves flaunting this particular principle and fighting with one another. I mentioned last night a very, very telling and very dramatic scene from the First World War of 1914 to 18. Nobody expected the war to last very long, and yet maybe a few months. And yet at Christmas time, at Christmas Eve, two opposing forces decided to work arm in arm, walk arm in arm, play, exchange gifts, and appreciate the universal aspect of Christmas. They played soccer together. This was not just in one trench. This was along a whole line. And so that the officers on both sides had to restrict it and said, no, you have to now start firing again at the friends that you have just made. Because, of course, the one side represented the universal values of love and peace and harmony. But war is completely opposed to that. It is take your enemy, destroy your enemy. Don't love your enemy as yourself. The social and emotional roomlessness issues from the shrinking of the human person, from the divine aspect, which is glorious and which is eternal, to the individual smallness and small-mindedness that gets reflected for millions of people in actual physical homelessness. And the homelessness also is included in those who are rich and have homes, vast mansions, because internally they have shrunk as well. They have become internally impoverished as well. They have become selfish, mean. And this is reflected in one of the various favorite Christmas stories traditionally played since Victorian times, and that is the Charles Dickens Christmas Carol. Ingratitude, on which Shakespeare's Lear agonizes, is a universal aspect of this. Its operative principle, ingratitude, is nothing but the incapacity to be with even those who have done you good or done you a good turn. And the same applies, of course, to the incapacity for faithfulness, of which in the Jesus story, Jesus Iscariot is a synonym. What does it mean to betray? What does it mean to betray a fellow human being? Never mind about kith and kin. From the humanities point of view, we are all kith and kin. So, is it not that the other is perceived as a burden or an inconvenience or even an enemy, somebody we are remote from? Who cares about people suffering in war zones in Africa or Yemen or anywhere else in the world? as long as we are fine. Infidelity and ingratitude, these are really country cousins. And so, if you look at the life of Jesus, Jesus had to be betrayed. Who? By his own disciple, his own friend. And this was necessary, it seems, to highlight the reality that the capacity for fidelity is a rare thing. And another aspect of the same syndrome is the incapacity for justice. Consider, for example, the trial of Jesus. He was tried several times, not just once. And each time he was found guilty, or each time, I should say, he was found not guilty. But the verdict was, he's guilty, and he should be tortured and hung and crucified on a cross. It's surprising. Well, we shouldn't be surprised at all. Man's incapacity to treat fellow human beings justly is actually a fact of life and history. Christmas, as an event, denotes really a redemptive intervention in human predicament that, according to the Vedanta, occurs not just once, but occurs whenever there is a need. The cosmic balancing power finds its way into the life of humanity, transforming it but for a period, until ignorance once more creeps in, and it doesn't take long for that to happen. At the inception of a Christian movement, it wasn't long before Christians were being persecuted. It wasn't long before, when Christians dominated, how the great persecutions of Jewish people occurred, being accused of deicide, no less. It wasn't long before power and greed and the effects of selfishness took hold in society, with people still calling themselves Christian, where the persecuted became the persecutors. And so it's to accept and love each other, what and all, that this period of time will highlight. Life exists on the foundation of interdependence, not independence. But interdependence becomes sometimes a torment, or seen as a torment, when the capacity to be human shrinks. To be fully human is to actually be fully expressive of divinity. And in man or woman relationships, the gender wars, and this displaces the complementarity, for example. Spirituality, not dogmatic religion per se, it seeks to reverse this shrinkage. It takes this human person and says, be like a flower. What use is a shrinking flower? Expand, open up, share your fragrance as a flower does with all, regardless of differences of ethnicity or regardless of differences in customs, traditions, beliefs. Even within the Christian world, Christmas is celebrated in a different way. There's no room. You see, there's no room in the inn. There's no room for a Christ child. There's no room for a pregnant woman. There's no room for people traveling. Normally speaking, that example given in Luke's account resonates throughout the halls of history and resonates today, unfortunately. There's no room for the other. There's no spirit of generosity. And so this is lamentably so in today's world. And it's lamentable even in all religions. Christianity, regardless of what the religion is, where the founder, as it were, was shifted off to a stable. To be a follower of any of the incarnations, to be a follower of Jesus, is to be under the mandate to love even one's enemies, and especially at this time, those who may be sleeping on the streets for various reasons. We have no right to criticize. And very often, a question is asked to me, if we go through a metropolitan area where we see beggars on the street, should we give something? Well, what right have we to judge whether we should give or not? We could make some basic inquiries. Where are you staying tonight? Why are you on the street? Why hasn't social services taken care of you? But if this is not done in a kindly way, so that we are giving not out of foolishness, but out of the spirit of love and generosity, then this whole acknowledgement is really judgmental and not full of love and compassion. Christianity has absolutely no excuse whatsoever for dividing human beings into us and them, and no other religion has the excuse either. We are one humanity, and if it comes out in different ways, either in a secular way or in a religious way, so be it. Let it be so. Why should every day not be something like a spirit of goodwill for all, a kind of Christmas everywhere? Tomorrow is the birth anniversary of Holy Mother, what we call Holy Mother Sri Sharada Devi. She was also born around the winter solstice. It is the winter solstice that took hold of the celebration of Christmas. Sol Invictus. But there again is symbolism. The symbolism really that the sun is a life giver. From our biological point of view, from our planet's point of view, the unconquerable sun is still unconquerable. And many of the things that we attribute to ourselves and our own activity and our own victories have nothing to do with us. We are running on solar energy. That's the fact of it. And yet our egoism takes hold. And so this whole period is not just a sectarian celebration. We can see the effects of it in a universal way. Take it as you want, but at least take the spirit of it. We come back to our Christmas Carol of Charles Dickens, where transformation from a mean-minded Scrooge is in operation. All work, all selfishness, all money-making. And when we see the events of the Christmas Carol, we can see how that developed and how a formerly generous person became very mean-minded and closed. And it took a revelation, a self-examination of your own life and your own self-centeredness, your own self-orientation, to highlight that creates a meaningless position in life. Why not have a spirit of generosity, not just on 25th of December, but every day of your life? Why not? Why not let the Christ child be born, as it were, and acknowledged every single second? And in doing that, why not access your own freedom? I'll finish this off now with just an extract from a beautiful, beautiful lecture by Swami Vivekananda, Christ the Messenger. I shall only highlight a few passages here. He writes like this. He says, "For you see, in three ways man perceives God. At first, the undeveloped intellect of the uneducated man sees God as far away, up in the heavens somewhere, sitting on a throne as a great judge." And my commentary on that is, this basic religion is the cause of warfare. The very opposite of loving your neighbor as yourself. The very opposite of every incarnation's teaching. So we say, this belongs to the undeveloped intellect. Putting this entity far away, maybe bringing him out or it out on special occasions when we're in trouble, and making a bargaining with that entity. So he looks upon him as a fire, as a terror. Maybe we can say as a rewarder or a punisher, living in fear. Now that's good to some extent, for there's nothing bad in it. But I would comment it's a short-term strategy. You must remember that humanity travels not from error to truth, but from truth to higher truth. It may be, if you like, that it's better from lower truth to higher truth, but never from error to truth. But suppose you start from here and travel towards the sun in a straight line. From here, the sun looks only small in size. Suppose you go forward 1,000,000 miles, the sun will be much bigger. At every stage, the sun will become bigger and bigger. Suppose 20,000 photographs had to be taken of the same sun from different standpoints. Those 20,000 photographs will all certainly differ from one another. But can you deny that each is a photograph of the same sun? So all forms of religion, high or low, are just different stages toward that eternal state of light. And that light is God himself. Then he says, some embodied a lower view, some are higher, and that is all the difference. Therefore, the religions of the unthinking masses all over the world must be, and have always been, of a God who is outside of the universe, who lives in heaven, who governs from that place, who is a punisher of the bad and a rewarder of the good, and so on. And as we advance, as man advanced spiritually, then he begins to feel that God was omnipresent and that he must be in him, that he must be everywhere, that he was not a distant God, but a deadly, clearly the soul of all souls. And Jesus' language for this would be, my Father in heaven. That's the first standpoint, something outside. And then I'm the vine and you are the branches, a connectedness. But the ultimate statement is, I and the Father are one. And so Swami Vivekananda goes on to say, as my soul moves my body, even so is God the mover of my soul. Soul within soul. And a few individuals had developed enough and were pure enough, they went still further and at last found God. And, says Swami Vivekananda, as the New Testament says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And they found at last that they and the Father were indeed one. Yes, find that all these three stages are taught by the great teacher in the New Testament. Note the common prayer he taught, the Our Father, who art in heaven, and so on. Mark you, it's the common prayer, because it's intended for the uneducated masses, referred to from the dualistic position that the Father is way out there somewhere. But then that prayer itself brings us in to a more intimate position. And so, to a higher circle, to those who had advanced a little more, he gave a more elevated teaching. I am in my Father, and ye in me, and I in you. And then when the Jews asked him who he was, he then declared that he and his Father were one. And the Jews taught that was in fact blasphemy. What did he mean by that? This has been also told by all the prophets. Ye are gods, and all of ye are children of the Most High. Mark these same three stages. You will find that it is easier for you to begin with the first and end with the last. And so Swami Vivekananda, in his lecture, Christ, the messenger, brings up the messenger side. The messenger came to show the path, that the spirit is not in forms, that it is not through all sorts of vexations and knotty problems of philosophy that you know the spirit. Better that you had no learning, better that you had never read a book in your life. These are not at all necessary for salvation. Neither wealth, nor position, nor power, not even learning. But what is necessary is that one thing, purity. Blessed are this pure heart. For the spirit is in its nature is pure. How can it be otherwise? And so he goes on like that. The great lesson of the messenger, and another which is the basis of all religions, is renunciation. It is not a coincidence, as I mentioned last night, that a band of devotees devoted to who they regarded as a unique incarnation for this modern age, something like a Jesus again, who we are told will have to come from age to age. From age to age, wherever there is a difficulty, a decline in the thing that brings harmony and peace everywhere. Some period of time that disturbs that greatly. Then the cosmic balancing power, the cosmic mind, the word becomes fresh. It dwells amongst us and restores the equilibrium, at least for a moment. The great, great message of all of these is renunciation. These small band of people, headed by Swami Vivekananda, who became Swami Vivekananda, took their monastic vows on this Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Day also, in earlier times again, what inspired Swami Vivekananda to go across the seas was his own swim across to that rock. This is mentioned in our EVS chat group today. Not having money for the ferry, he boldly, with great strength and courage, swam across. And there traditionally was a rock with a mother's footprint, this virgin goddess, that is Devi Kanya Kumari. And there on that rock, he meditated for some 3 days. And like Jesus rising from the dead after 3 days, resurrecting, he managed to get inspired. Let me resurrect the whole world with a universal message, which is exactly the message of this particular period of time. A message of knowledge, a message of peace, upliftment, and compassion. And so, this message of renunciation is there, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. That was his message, not outside you. Where goest thou to seek for the kingdom of God? Asks Jesus of Nazareth, when it is there within you. Cleanse the spirit and it's there. It's already yours. How can you get what is not yours? You can only get what is already yours. It's yours by right. It's yours by birthright. You are the heirs of immortality, sons of the eternal Father. And so this is the great lesson of all the messengers that come. This is the message of that Jesus. And now let us see how it originated. In a small stable, I'll simply reiterate what was told last night, elaborated a little bit. And so the crib behind me, it was not always there. In fact, the celebration of Christmas also was not always there. There was a great debate about it. It was only really in the time of Francis of Assisi that he decided, let me reenact this great scene. And he made a live crib. And since then, there's been a reenactment. But also from the 2nd century onwards, the idea of celebrating the birth was already there. But as I mentioned earlier, it is much better to meld it into what is the popular religion of the day, and see a son of God can be something like the solar entity, the life-giving, the unconquerable Son, Sol Invictus. And so it's not about the literal birth of Christ. It's about the spiritual birth within us all. It is about the devotion we have to that entity, thinking that the crib is in our very heart, that the manger is in our very heart, that there's a blessing entity, and that the straw around it can be something like the rays of the sun. You need an artist's eye to understand and appreciate it, of course. This is a universal thing. Since that, Christ child, or whatever else you want to call it, is sitting within our own hearts. And that's a wonderful symbolism of the crib. The crudity of the crib scene, of the stable, which is there. And then the breath, the warm breath, which we find within us, symbolized as ox and ass. Ass, a beast of burden, and an ox representing the sire of all the other cows that come, all the other calves that come. And there we see all the formulas for spiritual growth around. The compassion, the being looked after, shepherds indicating that there's a guiding hand within it. The star representing some divine resource that is a life giver, a guide towards something special. If we look for the star, we'll find it everywhere. We'll find the clues to our own divine origin everywhere. And so whether you take this as an indication of a celebration of an incarnation, whether you take it as the preamble for a new beginning, whether you take it as a period of peace and love and harmony, whether you take it as a nostalgic thing with gift giving everywhere, away from the commercial aspect of it, giving freely, giving people a gift from the heart, not just because it's a kind of seasonal obligation. The whole atmosphere of family that has been disrupted by the COVID, but the feeling of families joining from all over the place, meeting centrally for a common meal, for a hearty laugh, for a great festivity. All over the world we find this, Christian or non-Christian, atheist or theist. There's something special about our inherent urge for joy. There's something calming about our inner urge for peace. And so this is the universal message of Christmas. Just finishing off now with Christ the Messenger from Swami Vivekananda. He says this: we must bear another fact in mind, that my view of the great prophet of Nazareth would be from the standpoint of the Orient. Many times you forget also that the Nazarene himself was an Oriental of Orientals. With all the attempts to paint him with blue eyes and yellow hair, the Nazarene was still an Oriental. All the similes, the imageries in which the Bible is written, the scenes, the locations, the attitudes, the groups, the poetry, the symbol, speak to you of the Orient, of the bright sky, of the heat of the sun, of the desert, of the thirsty men and animals, of men and women coming with pitchers of their heads, on their heads to fill them with water at the wells, of the flocks, of the plowmen, of the cultivation that is going on around, of the watermill and wheel, of the mill pond, of the millstones. All these are to be seen today in Asia. The voice of Asia has been the voice of religion. The voice of Europe is the voice of politics. Each is great in its own sphere. The voice of Europe is the voice of ancient Greece. To the Greek mind, his immediate society was all in all. Beyond that, it is barbarian. None but the Greek has the right to live. Whatever the Greeks do is right and correct. Whatever else there exists in the world is neither right nor correct, nor should be allowed to live. It is intensely human in its sympathies, intensely natural, intensely artistic, therefore. The Greek lives entirely in this world. He does not care to dream. Even his poetry is practical. His gods and goddesses are not only human beings, but intensely human. with all the human passions and feelings, almost the same as with any of us. He loves what is beautiful, but mind you, says Swami Vivekananda, it is always external nature, the beauty of the hills, of the snows, of the flowers, the beauty of forms and of figures, the beauty in the human face, and more often in the human form. That is what the Greeks liked. And the Greeks, being the teachers of all subsequent Europeanism, the voice of Europe is Greek. There is another type in Asia. Think of that vast, huge continent whose mountain tops go beyond the clouds, almost touching the canopy of heaven's blue. A rolling desert of miles upon miles, where a drop of water cannot be found, neither will a blade of grass grow. Interminable forests and gigantic rivers rushing down into the sea. In the midst of all these surroundings, the Oriental love of the beautiful and of the sublime developed itself in an entirely another direction. It looked inside and not outside. There is also the thirst for nature, and there is also the same thirst for power. There is also the same thirst for excellence, the same idea of the Greek and barbarian. But it has extended over a large circle. In Asia, even today, birth or color or language never makes a race. That which makes a race is its religion. We are all Christians. We are all Mohammedans or Muslims. We are all Hindus. We are all Buddhists. No matter if a Buddhist is a Chinaman or is a man from Persia, they think that they are brothers because of their professing the same religion. Religion is the tie, the unity of humanity. And then again, the Oriental, for the same reason, is a visionary, is a born dreamer. The ripples of the waterfalls, the songs of the birds, the beauties of the sun and the moon, the stars and the whole earth are pleasant enough, but they are not sufficient for the Oriental mind. How beautifully he speaks. He wants to dream a dream beyond. He wants to go beyond the present. The present, as it were, is nothing to him. The Orient has been the cradle of the human race for ages, and all the vicissitudes of fortune are there. Kingdoms succeeding kingdoms, empires succeeding empires, human power and glory and wealth rolling down there. A Golgotha of power and learning, to use a Christian phrase. That is the Orient, a Golgotha of power, of kingdom, of learning. No wonder the Oriental mind looks with contempt upon the things of this world. And Jesus was a renunciant, starting from the humble beginnings of a simple, stable scene. There's a reason for it. Not born in a palace, around with wealth. We therefore see, says Swami Vivekananda continuing, in the life of the great messenger of life, the first watchword, not this life, but something higher. And like the true son of the Orient, he is practical in that. You people, he says Swami Vivekananda of the West, are practical in your own department, military affairs, and in managing political circles and other things. Perhaps the Oriental is not practical in those ways, but he's practical in his own field. He's practical in religion. If one preaches a philosophy tomorrow, there are hundreds who will struggle their best to make it practical in their lives. If a man preaches that standing on one foot will lead one to salvation, he will immediately get 500 to stand on one foot. You may call it ludicrous, but mark you, says Swami Vivekananda, beneath that is their philosophy, that intense practicality. In the West, plans of salvation mean intellectual gymnastics, plans which are never worked out, never brought into practical life. In the West, the preacher talks the best is the greatest preacher. So we find Jesus of Nazareth. In the first place, the true son of the Orient, intensely practical. He has no faith in this evanescent world and all its belongings. No seed or text torturing, as is fashion in the West in modern times. No need of stretching our texts until they will not stretch anymore. Texts are not in India rubber, and even that has its limits. Now, No, making of religion to pander to the sense vanity of the present day. Mark you, let us all be honest. If we cannot follow the ideal, let us confess our weakness, but not degrade it. Let not any try to pull it down. One gets sick of heart at the different accounts of the life of the Christ that Western people give. I do not know what he was not. One would make him a great politician, another perhaps would make of him a great military general, another a great patriot or patriotic Jew, and so on. Is there any warrant in the books for all these such assumptions? Is there any the best commentary on the life of a great teacher is his own life. The foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. All renunciation. That is what Christ says as the only way to salvation. He lays down no other way. Let us confess in sackcloth and ashes that we cannot do that. We still have fondness for me and mine. We want property, money, wealth. Woe unto us, let us confess and not put to shame that great teacher of humanity. He had no family ties. But do you think that that man had any physical ideas in him? Do you think that this mass of light, this God and not man, came down to earth to be the brother of animals? And yet people make him preach all kinds of things, all sorts of things. He had no idea of procreation, no sex ideas. He was a soul, nothing but a soul, just working a body for the good of humanity. So he goes on like that, highlighting the renunciation of Christ. And then, of course, he will say, if somebody were to say, or if he were to say, follow me, or think of me in a special way, and those who do not regard him in any special way, those who do not take his personality as such, to say, I'm afraid I can't follow you personally, but I follow your ideals. What will he say? All right, my brother, go on your way, but follow the ideals at least that much. He goes on in the synopsis of this great lecture, Christ the Messenger. So these are all ideas which we can contemplate profoundly on today and during this period. During this period, 12 days of Christmas are there, of course, ending up in the date of the Epiphany, which is the 6th of January. In some traditions, of course, that itself is Christmas time. And so for this period, let us see if we can engage in that great spirit and then perpetuate it into what will be the new year for most. To say that every day, in fact, can be a Mass of the Christ, a Christ Mass. Thank you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace be all to you. And may you have a wonderful Christmas day and a wonderful Christmas season. Thank you.